So extraordinary business in the Middle East. If, as is widely expected to be the case, Israel is behind these exploding pages, just how did they do it? You may have seen some of the video footage already on some of the news channels. Well, here's the audio. Here's the sound of one pager exploding in a Hezbollah militant's pocket in a Lebanese supermarket. And understandably, people fleeing in terror. Soon afterwards, Lebanon's interim health minister, Dr. Firaz Abiad, gave this update on the level of the casualties the attackers caused.
The number of people injured is around 2,750. The number of martyrs so far is 8. There are now over 200 critical cases. They are in critical condition or require surgery. We have received over 150 blood units so far, and over 100 hospitals have so far received those who have been injured.
And of course, that was immediately after the event. As I mentioned, we're now at 9 dead, 300 critical, I believe 2,750 sustaining other injuries. We also heard yesterday from Major General Pat Ryder, spokesperson for the Pentagon, who spoke with reporters at a press briefing in Washington to give the U.S. perspective on this attack.
I can tell you, to my knowledge, there's no U.S. involvement in this at all. Again, it's something that we're monitoring. And in terms of potential escalation, a key focus for this department and the U.S. government writ large is on working with partners in the region, to include Israel, to prevent the conflict between Israel and Hamas from spiraling.
And here was the assessment of Christopher Burgess. He spent 30 years as an officer with the CIA. He was speaking to my LBC colleague Andrew Marr last night.
I would go along the path that it was the lithium battery, as opposed to putting explosives in each pager that was part of a purchase order. That to do that increases the level of difficulty to an extraordinary amount, unless you're at the manufacturer.
Well, we'll talk about what this means for the area politically and possible conflict with Chris Doyle's Commentator in a moment. But first, let's get into the aspect of the armoury of this. Major Andrew Fox is a Middle East analyst and former British Army paratrooper. He served in the Middle East. He's now a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. OK, sir. Brains who are specialised in this field have been puzzled and wondering how, if it is Israel, how they did it, or how whoever did do it, how they did it. What are your theories, Major? Good morning.
Good morning. There are rafts of theories out there. And as with the Ismail Haniyeh bombing in Tehran, where somebody killed Hamas's leader, we'll probably never know the exact truth of this. But what we do know is that they're going to have infiltrated the supply chain somewhere. They're going to have to have found a mechanism to detonate them, and they're going to have to have known who and when they needed to press the button for. The theories that are most credible for me, I think, are that at some point along the supply chain there has been some degree of tampering. The explosions that we've seen don't look like a normal lithium battery going off, because they heat up first. There's indicators that they're about to go pop, and then when they do go bang, the injuries are far worse than one would normally expect from a lithium battery. So there's a working theory that the batteries have been interfered with somehow, and then the batteries have been detonated later down the line by some kind of cyber hack.
This is a region of the world you know well, Major. How advanced are Israel's security services and Mossad?
Oh, phenomenally so. Phenomenally so. And the difference between them and most intelligence services in the world are that they are prepared to take the kind of offensive action that we've seen yesterday. It's not hugely common for an intelligence agency to undertake such high-profile sort of operations that clearly make front-page headlines around the world.
So you're a military bloke to your boots. As the news came through yesterday, was your reaction, I thought someone would do this one day, or was it absolute shock that this was like out of a Hollywood movie?
This is sci-fi stuff. I mean, I'm aware of modern tracking capabilities and how phones and pages and things like that can be tracked. Even when the cell signal is off and they're not connected to a network, you can still track certain kinds of mobile phones. But for something like this, is unprecedented, and I think it's possibly what we can call the world's first weaponized cyber attack.
And you mentioned mobile phones. My understanding, Major, is that Hezbollah had instructed its operatives to move away from mobile phones and move on to pagers. If that is the case, what was the thinking behind that? Security, I imagine.
Yeah, I think the more complicated the tech, the more easily hacked it is. And so the working logic between a lot of these sort of terrorist organizations is they go back to the very basics. And we're talking 1980s technology here. There's hardly anyone uses pagers these days because it's old tech. But it still needs to connect to a network, and that means it can be tracked, and it still has a microchip inside, which means it can be hacked. So it does look at increasingly as if nothing is safe these days, which is certainly interesting. And if I were a terrorist organization, I'd be living in a state of fear now. So the psychological effect of this, as well as the practical effect, is very impressive.
Grateful for your time. Thank you. Major Andrew Fox is a Middle East analyst, now research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. So that's the scientific and the military aspect, as it were. Let's move to the political dimensions of this. Chris Doyle is a commentator on Middle Eastern politics, director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Israel, as yet, of course, refusing to accept responsibility. But as I said earlier, all roads lead to Rome. All roads seem to lead to Tel Aviv. What could the impact of this be? Morning to you.
Well, the impact is uncertain. It's obviously risks and escalation in a conflict between Hezbollah and Israel that has been spiraling ever since last October. We all fear that it could go into an all-out war in the worst case scenario, but anything that actually shifts it further towards that puts the whole region at risk, because it will be far worse even than what we have seen in Gaza, and that's been bad enough. Hezbollah has far greater capabilities. It will be able to visit upon Israel a lot more suffering, and obviously Israel has extraordinary military capabilities and has made clear that it will hold Lebanon accountable for Hezbollah attacks. These attacks are regular. We're looking already at a medium level conflict with rocket fire and bombs and drone attacks going off regularly. The killing of a very senior Hezbollah commander only weeks ago, and it points to the absolute necessity of the major powers, those with influence like the United States, but not just Washington, of trying to de-escalate and get away from this. So it is a very precarious region. Speaking to people in Lebanon yesterday, there is a climate of fear there. I'm not talking about those associated with Hezbollah, but all Lebanese have already been through so much trauma in recent years. You'll remember that Beirut port explosion, the largest non-nuclear explosion in history, the collapse of the economy, 80% of the population in poverty. And the last thing most of them want to see is a full-on conflict with Israel.
If Israel finds itself in the dock for this, and there are some means by which they can be shown to be responsible, what will they assert as their justification? The daily strikes, the missiles being fired by Hezbollah?
Well, that will be the justification. I think that many people will obviously see that they have a reason to go after Hezbollah. I think there's going to be a huge debate as to the means here, because although obviously they have seemingly got into the supply chain of Hezbollah, a lot of civilians get caught up in this. I mean, imagine if you're driving a car and the driver's pager goes off, you could veer into civilians. A child was killed. You've got these bombs going off into supermarkets and all over the place. It's terrifying for ordinary people. So I think there is a serious issue as the legality of such an attack. And what does it mean for the future in terms of supply chain attacks? Some of them won't necessarily be that high tech. What if you get into drugs supply chain systems, medical supply chain systems, all sorts of ways in which enemies can try to bring about suffering. So I think we do have an issue going forward as to how to protect civilians from such attacks.
Grateful for your time. Thank you very much indeed. Talking there about the aspect there of what it means for the Middle Eastern conflict. Chris Doyle is a commentator on Middle Eastern politics.